Jenny, and we'll leave the floor to you.
Thanks very much. I can smell your lunch. So, I'm not going to speak for an hour, I promise you. It's strange actually to see you described as an activist. I'm not sure I do think myself as an activist. I'm sure other people here have got much better say to that. Mainly, and the reason why I'm here, actually, I think, is that between 2004, is this microphone working properly? Between 2004 and 2010, I was working with central government on various bits of disability policy, primarily around social care. I worked with the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit. We produced the report Improving the Life Chances of Disabled People. And then I went to work with the Office for Disability Issues on the independent living strategy and developing the right to control, etc. And I left, I stopped doing that a week before the general election in 2010, partly for personal reasons, but actually mainly because I didn't think that it would any longer be possible to work within government to try and bring about positive changes. There were lots of things I disagreed with the last government about, but there were opportunities for making progress. And currently there aren't. Mark described some of the things that we're facing, and I won't go into them in any detail. One of the main problems, I think, for us, the disability movement, is that this government, and indeed the last government, has taken our language and our analysis and used it in ways which, particularly currently, are against our interests. So, the social model of disability is bandied about by the current government to justify the changes that they're making to disability living allowance, etc. So when I stopped working with government, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation gave me the opportunity to take a step back and think about, what progress have we made and what challenges do we face in continuing to make progress. And I produced a fairly short report for them called Rethinking Disability Policy, and I brought some copies of it which are on the table somewhere in publications. Unfortunately, there are only photocopies because the print version is now out of print. So what I want to do is to identify 5 challenges that I think we face as a disability movement. And I don't have the answers, and I'm going to be raising more questions than answers, in fact. But I think that we've got to take a step back and really think about what kind of analysis we're using, what kind of ideas are we trying to put forward, what kind of values are we trying to make progress on. And we need to do that if we have any chance of influencing the policies going into the next election. So my first challenge relates to social care. For many years we've insisted on choice and control in the context of social care. And we've done this for very good reasons, because choice and control is crucial if we're to have basic human rights and civil rights. And that's why we campaign for having control over the resources that are available for social care, whether it's in the form of direct payments or personal budgets. But we really have to recognise that there's a reason why the Conservative government of the 1990s and the new Labour government that followed responded positively to first the campaign for direct payments and now to the idea of personal budgets. Because when we argued, give us the purchasing power as individuals instead of leaving it in the hands of local authorities, and we will deliver better outcomes, that argument fitted very snugly into the belief that markets deliver most efficiently what consumers want. That was an argument for privatisation. The argument was that you need competition in order to get good outcomes. And what goes along with that is that the state should do as little as possible, leaving most things to private enterprise. And our society is increasingly governed by markets, by privatisation. And that's what's happened to social care. Most social care services are now delivered by private companies. And I think we do have to ask whether people who need help to go about their daily lives, help which involves intimate care, which help that enables someone to access the most basic human rights, like the right to communicate, can rely on the profit motive of either making a profit to deliver this assistance in a way that protects and promotes their human rights. Because giving and receiving intimate care is not the same as having a car service. To rely on a person in such a way is inevitably associated with vulnerability to abuse, unless the person providing the care holds and promotes values which in many instances are actually incompatible with the profit motive. If you're going to maximise, if you're going to increase as much as you can the profit that you make as a company, that means holding down wages, making wages as low as possible, increasing productivity by reducing the amount of time that is spent on each task to a minimum, which is why you get 15-minute visits that people experience, only investing in training to provide very basic competence, and minimising regulation that companies are subjected to. And that's not to say, I'm not arguing that public authorities are any better at delivering our human rights. We all know that in the past, the scandals of the old institutions, that they weren't necessarily any better. But the mistake was to replace those organisations with organisations motivated by profit and answerable to their shareholders. The result is very clear if you look at the Care Quality Commission's ratings of agencies and organisations providing care. The for-profit sector, the private companies, which actually holds the largest share of the market, is consistently the worst. It offers the most poor services and it's got the fewest excellent services. Of course, the early campaign for direct payments was always clear that giving individual disabled people purchasing power was only a means to an end, it wasn't the end in itself. And that's why you've got organisations like Norfolk Coalition attempting to provide support services for people to use their direct payments, to use their funding, their own funding. But much of that, in order to enable people to get the kind of assistance that promotes their human rights. But much of all those values was lost because organisations, user-led organisations, have had to struggle to survive and are having to operate within the commissioning practices that private companies have a much greater advantage in. So my first challenge is how do we campaign for and develop organisations which are not dependent on the profit motive and which are driven by values which both promote individual human rights and the wider public good. And in order to do that, we've actually got to ask questions like what kind of commissioning and funding structures encourage organisations that are driven by the public good rather than private profit, and what kind of regulation would be required that actually nurtures those kinds of organisations. So that's my first challenge. The second relates to the arguments that we've made in the past to support our demands for disability equality. One of the main arguments that we used when we were campaigning for disability discrimination legislation was the so-called business case for employing disabled people and for recognising their power as consumers. But what does that say about people from whom it's difficult to make a profit? Because that's what the business case boils down to. What about people whose long-term health difficulties mean they need a lot of time off work? People whose requirements are so individual that they can't be mass-produced in order to maximise profit. I want to argue that instead of using the so-called business case for arguing for disability equality, it would have been much better to use the moral position of do as you would be done by, which actually is called the golden rule. It's actually at the heart of most of the world's religions, and I'm not religious, but it seems to me a very, very good golden rule. And it's at the heart of most moral philosophy. Do as you would be done by. It's the most important thing my mother ever taught me, actually. Or another moral argument that I think would be stronger is to argue that no one knows whether they or someone they love will become disabled. So it's the interest of all of us that we create a level playing field for those that do. You don't know what's going to happen. I mean, some people call non-disabled people not disabled yet, which is making the point. Yes, I recognise that there are economic arguments to be made for employing disabled people and for opening up goods and services to us and for supporting us so that we can live ordinary lives. And we've actually been very successful in making those arguments. But in doing so, I'd say we've actually often neglected to promote values which are far more powerful for delivering our human rights and our civil rights. And neglecting those values means leaving the field open to the values of every man for himself, or survival of the fittest, or I see today Ed Miliband has got this slogan of sink or swim. We're creating a sink or swim society, which I think is quite effective as a way of putting it. Because these are the values that are at the heart of the economic and political ideas that have become increasingly dominant over the last 20 years, but then are really ratcheting up now. And these are the values which attack the idea of a progressive taxation system, of using society's pooled resources to create a level playing field. These are the values which say that it's okay to increase inequality in our society because it's the wealth creators that enable everybody else in society to get better off. And on the contrary, all the evidence is that if the rich get richer, the poor just get poorer. So my second challenge is that we should no longer be arguing our case for disability equality using the so-called business case, but we should actually be making a much stronger moral argument for why we want disability equality. And if you think this is a naive argument which doesn't belong in the mainstream, it's actually the same argument that's playing out in America at the moment in the argument between Obama and Mitt Romney. My third challenge is about how we've argued for the social model of disability. It's so distressing to hear the government say that they've adopted the social model of disability. In fact, current policies are based on an individual and a medical model approach. What the welfare reform policies do is that to rely on publicly funded benefits and services is a bad thing, to be avoided at all costs and to be reserved for a residual group of the most vulnerable, the most dependent people. And these policies assume that provision for disabled people has been too generous, creating unnecessary so-called dependency, and that therefore the stricter criteria need to be applied to qualifying for disability benefits, together with sanctions, in order to motivate people into economic independence. If the government had really adopted the social model of disability, instead they would be developing policies which were actually aimed at employers, because they're the ones who require their behaviour to be adjusted, to enable people with impairments or long-term health conditions to work, because it's so-called employment practices that need to change, not disabled people's so-called motivation. So that, you know, it's clear how we can attack the government's policies, but actually we also have to recognise that our own campaigning on the social model didn't actually address the issue of people who are too ill to work, whether that's in the short term or the long term. However great the adjustments made, however positive the attitudes of employers, neither the government's position nor our position too often on the social model allows for recognition that some people are too ill to work, and that it's legitimate that people in such situations should look to a combination of contributory benefits and benefits funded out of general taxation to provide a replacement for earned income for them. So my third challenge for us as a disability movement is how do we include the experiences of ill health in the social model of disability in a civil rights framework without having to resort to the language of vulnerability, because that's the only way in which the needs of such people are being recognised by the government at the moment. You have to be extremely vulnerable for it to be okay for you to rely on benefits. And using that kind of language is inevitably associated with tragedy and with deficit, with a loss of autonomy. And it's a language that's very damaging to individuals, but also to our aims of promoting disability equality. So that's my third challenge. We need to incorporate the experience of long-term ill health into the social model of disability. My fourth challenge relates to the culture of mistrust, which is so dominant at the moment. And it's also a challenge about the role of co-production. All of the current policy and practice around welfare reform in particular at the moment is based on a fundamental mistrust about people. There's an assumption that people will lie about their needs and their circumstances. It's a very, very nasty view of humanity that's being promoted. So eligibility for support is determined by ATOS and its work capability assessment, which has a scoring system which is administered by people who are assumed to have much greater expertise in determining the needs of someone who they don't know, who they only meet for a very limited period of limited time, and often complex experiences are to be judged by somebody who usually has no expertise in the person's particular impairment or illness. Of course, there'll always be dishonest people, but as we all know, including the government, they are few and far between. And to base whole systems for determining eligibility on these dishonest few is just wrong. There's many other ways and better ways to identify fraud. It's not just wrong because it's inefficient and it creates inaccurate results, as we see with the rate of successful appeals against work capability assessments, but also because it contributes towards a culture of mistrust, which is very damaging for us as individuals and for us as a society. One of the reasons that assessments for benefits are so inappropriate is because the people being assessed have never been fully involved in writing them. Unemployed people, whether disabled, ill or non-disabled, have never been involved in co-producing policies and services that might maximise their chances of finding and keeping paid employment. There's a lot of, sometimes it's lip service, sometimes it is actually a bit more than lip service, paid to the idea of co-producing things with disabled people. And we've been very successful in doing that in the context of social care. We've been less successful in doing that in the context of welfare reform. But there is actually some recognition by the current government that they should involve disabled people, for example, in developing the new assessment for personal independence payments. So they have, I can't remember what it's called, it's got the word customer in it. But they've got a group of people that are advising them about it. That's not good enough, because disabled people should have been actually involved at the start of developing the policy. Did we actually need to replace DLA? But nobody talks about involving unemployed people per se in developing welfare reform or in how to implement it. It's just not considered legitimate at all. But unless we're involved in those kinds of policy agendas, unless those policies are co-produced and co-delivered in partnership with people affected by them, we'll always be subject to unhelpful and inappropriate assessments, eligibility criteria and responses. And as we know, this can result in systems and processes like the current ATOS assessments, which ruin people's lives. So it's disabled people themselves, people who know the difference between ill health, impairment and disability, who know what type of support is required, that need to be at the heart of developing changes in welfare policy. So that fourth challenge is, how do we put the same efforts into pushing for co-production in development and delivering social security and employment policies as we did in the field of social care? And my final challenge is about why we need a welfare state and on what basis we should argue for it. If you look at some of the key writing in disability studies and disability politics in the years up to 2010, there were lots of references to the ways in which policies and services created dependency rather than enabling independent living. And those were very powerful arguments. But we've been robbed of that campaigning position by the current government and the media's rhetoric about dependency on state benefits. So, sorry.
Can we recommend that any speakers who come along, can we do a PowerPoint? Because we'll lose.
I'm sorry.
Because all things we've got others to do, but anything
Yeah.
we want to do, we have a PowerPoint. Very
Yeah.
important. We're losing the there, but lots of people. Any speakers along the group, we have a PowerPoint.
Yeah. I'm very sorry about that. I don't have the facilities anymore to do that, but I'm very sorry. Do you want me to explain anything again?
You can explain the last part. We'll lose a PowerPoint. Explain the last part.
Okay. Okay, so the last bit about my final challenge is about why we need a welfare state and why we should argue for it. We were very successful in arguing for independent living, which is about having choice and control. But what we've been robbed in the last couple of years of that argument, because the word independent has been taken to mean not being dependent on the state. Yeah, not relying on benefits or services. So all the arguments in the media at the moment are about, it's a good thing if you stand on your own 2 feet, if you don't depend on benefits, if you don't depend on support. And you know, one of the real tragedies, I think, is the way that the increase in money being spent on disability living allowance has been seen as a bad thing. Disability living allowance is actually about enabling people to get the additional support, some of the additional support that they need in order to go about their daily lives. And if we really had a welfare state that was about creating a level playing field, about enabling us all to have an equal chance of having equal lives, your new name, then we see it as a good thing that as a society we were helping more people to have the money to be able to do that. But instead what has happened is that the increase in the money that's been spent on disability living allowance is seen as a bad thing. It's seen as too many people being dependent on the state instead of DLA helping people to be independent. And so the government intends to reduce the number of people who are eligible for DLA. So what I would argue is that we should put forward arguments, we should campaign for the kind of welfare state which is about creating a level playing field, which is about recognising that there are people in our society who have additional things, additional support that they need in order to have equal lives, and that it is right for our society to make resources available, to make funding available in lots of different ways to make that possible. And we might use, in the Disability Discrimination Act has got a concept of reasonable adjustment. Now there's problems with the term reasonable adjustment, but what it means is that adjustments, changes should be made to enable somebody to access services, to get goods, to get employment on the same basis of somebody who isn't disabled. And I think that's how we should be looking at what kind of welfare state we want. We want a welfare state that makes reasonable adjustments for us as disabled people so that we can have equal lives. And that's not about arguing for a welfare state as a safety net, because that's what, for only the most dependent, for only the most vulnerable, because that's the kind of welfare state that is being put forward at the moment. Instead, we should be arguing for a welfare state which is providing a level playing field for us to access equal lives, and that it should be a good thing that our society makes that possible. So those are my 5 challenges. I would say that if we are to have equal lives, we have a vision of a welfare state, of the kind of policies which are very different from the ones that are currently being put forward by the government and predominantly by the media. And if we are to have any chance of changing those ideas, of changing those policies, we've got to start campaigning for something very different. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jenny. It's very interesting to see how the language has changed over the last few years, and to see that the words that we thought meant something are being used in a different way. There's some questions up the back.
Right.
Could you wait until the mic comes to you and then everyone will be able to hear you?
Right. I've had a social worker for nearly a year. Now, the fact is, I've been struggling through the paperwork, right? And that is the whole point that I work as a social worker for, and he never paid attention to me. He just, because I'm in the progress of moving home, and that's all up in the air at the moment, because me and my fiancé got married, right? So we need an ideal property for us both to settle down in. Now, all I need is support with my paperwork. Now, when Stonham, right, came out, have been coming out to me, but I've been so kerfuffled. All I've wanted is I've pointed out all the paperwork to her and she don't want to know.
If you're asking for that type of support and they're not wanting to give it to you directly, then they really need to be looking at getting you some advice and support from organisations just like this one. Because we could help you with that, as long as we know that that's what you need. I think perhaps the best thing for you to do there would be to ask for the social worker to make sure that you get that sort of support through direct payment, and that would be the way of going about doing that.
I can't get direct payment.
Well, could we look at your particular situation a little bit later on? We can have a look at that. But at the moment, what I'd like to do is ask for questions around Jenny's discussion. I know there are some down here in the corner, so where's the microphone? Right. Hello, if you could come down the front, please, there's somebody here.
Hello, this is a question for Jenny. Jenny, I was really interested in your challenges. Thank you very much, and I'm delighted that you were able to be here. My name is Caroline Jones. I'm from the Norfolk Association of Disabled LGBT People. A lot of challenges in our community, of course. One of the challenges I think you might want to consider adding is the legal case. Because I worked as an equality and diversity practitioner for many, many years in the public sector. And I worked with a business case, and I worked with a moral case. And those cases went straight down the tubes many, many times. And when I started working with the law and saying to my bosses, this is the Disability Discrimination Act, these are the codes of practice, this is the guidance, this is this stuff, this is the law, this is what he wants to do, they paid attention. As soon as I said anything about, oh, would you mind awfully, they just turned away and said, oh, well, we'll just do the least we can, the least we must. But once we start using the law, and I think most people don't know their legal rights, which is a great disadvantage to all of us. We must know what the Equality Act 2010 does for disabled people. We're actually entitled to more favourable treatment than non-disabled people in some circumstances, and many of us don't know that. So it's very, very important for an organisation like this, your new name, but I'll call you NCODP for now, for organisations like this organisation to start to teach and be active around taking judicial reviews, for example. You can start on a small case, you can take a local authority to court. You can make big, big, big waves by doing that sort of thing. They sit up and take lots of notice. So I would ask you if you would also consider adding the legal case to the moral case, because in my experience the moral case hasn't worked, neither has the business case.
No, I agree. You can't just rely on the moral case. And indeed it is when we get rights established in law that makes a difference. But what I was saying was that you use the moral case to argue for the legal rights. Alf Morris, who as a private, as an MP, introduced the Private Members Bill that became the first useful set of rights that we had, the Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act of 1970. He actually used very powerfully the argument, you don't know what's going to happen to you. You could become disabled, a member of your family could become disabled, because that's what happened to my family. He said that was what made the argument in the House of Commons at that point. When we argued for the Discrimination Act, we used the business case. I think that was a mistake. What I'm saying is that I think we should use we should use a better moral case to argue for rights, and then you use the law to get those rights in place.
And we don't do that.
No, we certainly don't. And we need organisations like this to advocate for people so that they can get what rights they have.
Thank you. The chap at the back there, please.
I may be for some Fredward boards from opening to post PA, and I'm also a volunteer for opening doors. I agree with all your challenges there, Jenny. However, before we even go to the big government, we need to sort out the Norfolk government. They're behind times. I do apologise for the sort of elderly people, but it's too much of a stagecoach in Norfolk. Norfolk don't even have a strategy. They don't even have a structure, on this option of change, bringing in the learning disability. They're happy in dealing with the old age pensioners, but you bring in learning disabilities, and the disability of the majority of people in here, they don't have a clue. And I know that because I've been to a meeting and I've had the Norfolk Commissioner sit in front of me, and he doesn't know nothing. So that's my opinion. Teach the Norfolk government first before we even think of going down into London.
This is why we are so keen on the making sure that our co-production work is really, really strong with Norfolk County Council. To a degree, we have to wait to be invited, but it could be that we need to be more proactive in forcing co-production. But you can only co-produce when they're doing some work on something. If they choose to ignore entirely a section of work, then we can't co-produce with them. And that's why our campaigning is so important, that we can bring forward points like this and say, we know there are X number of hundreds or thousands of people in Norfolk for whom your work isn't doing the job. And then we can prompt the Norfolk councillors to say, we actually want a programme that will do this, that will create a strategy. And then we can work in co-production with them. We've just got to make sure that we get the evidence to bring to the councillors in the first place. And that's why we are working so hard in the coming year on lived experience, making sure that we get these cases evidenced, so that we've actually got something to prove when we go to them. Because at the moment, it's all, we feel that we've got an argument, but we're not entirely sure. And this feeds back into Jenny's point, that they need to know there's a business case. Well, that's not entirely true, because we need to be able to prove the moral case for this, as Jenny is saying. So that's why the strategy that we have should come up with some answers before too long. Now, there was another question, I think, from the side here. Yes, Vanessa.
Hi, I just want to revisit the point that you said about the law. As we all know, that there are some very strong laws in this country now representing disability. The Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act, the Disabled Persons and Carers Act 2000, you've got the Disability Discrimination Act, the Equalities Act, the Autism Act 2009. None of these acts are being enforced to support disabled people. I don't quite follow what you were saying about using the moral argument to get to the legal argument. We have the law. I don't completely understand why the law is so impotent to enforce disabled people's rights.
I mean, it isn't just in the area of disability equality that legislation, that people don't get their rights. I mean, getting an Act of Parliament is only the first step. You then have to get it implemented. And whether legislation is implemented depends so much on the power of the people that are affected by it. And unfortunately, disabled people, with the withdrawal of legal aid for all sorts of things, with the difficulties that user-led organisations experience, with the lack of advocacy services, it's very, very difficult to get your rights. But that's where the problem is.
Thank you very much. The gentleman in the top, please.
The thing what concerned me is, I mean, what Snow said is all to do with benefits as well. What concerned me, there's two benefits coming out, and most concerned disabled people, which one do they go on to, the work one or the other one? And it's quite important that we didn't know which one we're going to go on to, because they're going to access everyone when this new benefit come out, the PDIs, as they've said, and people's concerned, if they can't work, they can't do it, but which one they'll go on, and that's very important for people with learning disabilities, or anybody who's on benefits, which benefits they're going to go on. It's very important, and we don't know which ones they go on. But you might be on the wrong one or the right one, and with everyone in this room, everyone who's got learning disabilities, will mostly go on these benefits, and we don't know which one there's two, and we don't know which one will go on. It's quite important.
Do you want an answer to that?
Yes, do me, thank you.
Yeah. Could you just restate the question as briefly as you can?
Yeah. The question is, what benefits are people with disabilities go on? There's two. One for the work and one for special people with disabilities. Coming out soon, and everyone with disabilities will go on them. There's two benefits. Which one will people go on to? The PBI, the work side of one, or the other one. There's two. Yeah, limited, yeah.
Wouldn't that be an individual decision?
I don't know, but it was concerned everybody with learning disability anyway.
I think generally what you're I think generally what you're expressing is how important it is for anybody, but maybe particularly people with learning difficulties, to have access to support when they're going through the benefit system. Because it's very difficult, it's very complicated, it's difficult to understand, and you need support in order to get your rights, in order to get what you're entitled to.
Thank you. I'm Gemma, also working alongside Okay, can you hear me? I'm Jenna. I'm also working with working in London regarding what you were saying earlier, Kathy, was sorry? No, co-production. I'm on the co-production team, and I'm also helping Royal Court with getting it moved into Norfolk. But regarding the benefit issue, and Jenny, is there any way you can change the wording people with disabilities, please? Because the wording, what you were saying earlier, we should be using, because everyone has got a disability. We shouldn't be classed as disabled. You know, so if you could change that, that'd be great. I'm also trying to get each county council to sign up to making it real as well.
Now does it work? Right. I'm afraid I didn't quite understand the point you were making about people with disabilities.
Instead of saying people are disabled, I'm saying you just now said that people are disabled. Everyone should rarely use people with disabilities.
Well,
because that's what we've got. We shouldn't be classed as disabled if we're in a wheelchair or not.
Well,
because you're giving us a label, and you shouldn't be.
Yeah. I don't agree with you, I'm afraid. But the first thing is that I think everybody's entitled to call themselves what they want.
Well, that's what we are.
Everybody's entitled to self-definition. But I would describe myself as somebody with a physical impairment who is disabled by society's reaction to people with physical impairment. And that's what the social model of disability is about. It isn't I call myself a disabled person because I'm not defining myself by my impairment. I'm defining myself by the experience of inequality that I have within the current society that I live in.
It's just that I've got a phrase saying that we weren't been asked by God to be born with a disability. So we would like to be called a person with a disability, not disabled, because as from the past, we should be looking to the future.
Thank you very much, Janet. Are there any other questions? Over there in the corner.
I'd like to back up what that young lady was just saying. I think that difficult vocabulary isn't understood by many. I really do think that we need to work hard on using plain language. I think it's easier to learn something in plain English and then to learn the correct business terms for it afterwards. I really do feel quite strongly about this because I believe, certainly in our organisations, that people don't understand that there are regulations that we have to stick by, our constitution, whether we like it or not. And because of language that's used, often that people read, that people don't understand fully. I just think that's a really important point. I think it's something when we look at doing training in the future that we need to look at. Many people are academics, but equally many people that need...
To run out of power over there. Perhaps what I could say around all of this is that there needs to be more understanding. We need to explain our position better. It's very difficult sometimes, depending on what audience you're looking at, whether you're looking at academics, whether you're looking at social workers, whether you're looking at support workers, or whatever. We often don't make proper explanations right at the start. We assume people know what we're talking about because it's so obvious to us. But it's not obvious out there, and it does need to be clarified a lot more. And I think if it were, we wouldn't perhaps come across the same sort of difficulties that we do. But it is, I think, work in progress. Would you agree, Jenny? Okay. Are there any other points? You've got another point, Caroline.
Just to add to, a number of colleagues in the room are worried about what we do about the law. And another colleague behind, and I think my colleague here is concerned. One of the things that we're doing positively is that we're planning to establish an Equality and Diversity Council of the voluntary sector groups in the county, so that we can call to account the various public bodies that are responsible for delivering our equality, civil and human rights. And that's in the process of being established at the moment, because we know they're getting away with a huge amount of doing nothing. So there is work afoot, and there will be some announcements coming within the next month or so, calling people to a meeting to say, please come and help and be part of this accountability group, let's say, for the moment. It will be called the Norfolk Equality and Diversity Council.
That's really good news. That's excellent. We look forward to hearing much more about that. One more question from...
Yeah.
I was just going to say a quick one, and just saying about a lot of people use abbreviations, but they don't always know what they mean. You can only try and put them in full.
Yeah. That's Barrett. That's Barrett. That's Barrett from Michael here. I'm interested when things are being acted upon, who's actually acting upon on our behalf.
Do you mean in this organisation, Dan?
Any organisation.
Well, you'd have to say which organisation, or else we don't know who's working in them.
This organisation.
Okay, in this organisation, the board acts on your behalf because you voted them to do it. And in other organisations we work with, it rather depends on the work that we're doing. But normally we try to get to the top. We try to make sure that if we're going to do any work with any organisation at all, we're working with people who can actually do something rather than just talk about it.
So who's above us then?
Well, we're an independent organisation. We don't really have anybody above us. We work in Norfolk in cooperation with all sorts of other disability groups and other groups. So it's not a top or a bottom. We work together. And in other areas, like if we're working with the council or something like that, we work with the top of whatever section of the council it is, and if we don't get the right answer from them, we go further, we go right to the top. There's a lot of work done with Harold Bobner, who's the Director of Adult Social Services.
So can we go above the government then?
Oh, I see. Well, yes, that's a different thing altogether. We could, I suppose, but you'd have to work the way through the system. Yeah? Okay. Right, we're nearly at lunchtime now, so Jenny, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to ask a question. We've got the election coming up before too long. What do you think would be the best thing that we could do to bring the sort of arguments you've put forward today, to bring those to a campaign that will lead up to the next election?
I don't know. I'm retired. I retired in 2010. I'm very impressed by this organisation. I wish we had a disability organisation like this in Suffolk, where I live. Well, I hope so one day. I I think there's all sorts of things that individuals and organisations can be doing. I mean, it depends on where your points of influence are, where you're already, making an impact. I mean, you already have a relationship with Norfolk County Council, obviously, and you're helping to bring about changes, hopefully, in the way that they behave, but they are constrained by overall national policy. So actually, we do have to direct our attention to national politicians. And at the moment, Anne Maguire, who was the Minister for Disabled People in the last Labour government, and Liam Byrne, who's the one who left the note saying there's no money left, are going around the country. Have they been here yet? No, well, if you invited them, they are going around the country talking to disabled people and their organisations about what should be in the Labour manifesto for the next election on disability policy. So invite them. And tell them. That's one thing you can do.
That's right. We have done that before, and we may well do it again. There's one more question from over the back there, please.
For the disability who have fits, what would you do?
Sorry, you need to say that again for me.
If people who's got disability and have fits and that, right, what would you do?
What would I do about fits?
Yeah.
I'd go and speak to a doctor. And if the doctor doesn't help you, the way to go about making him help you would be to get in touch with, from April of next year, the Health Watch that we're going to be involved with, to make sure that they know that you're not getting the right sort of support, and they will then hopefully be able to make sure that you do get that type of support. The other thing you can do is to ask for an advocate who'll go to the doctor with you and make sure that you're heard properly and that you get a decent answer. Okay, well now we need to... Sure.
To pick up the last point, Jenny spoke recently at a meeting we organised in London, where she gave a similar presentation to this. We organised it with Inclusion London, which is the umbrella body for the whole of London, all broad disabled organisations in London. No, just Inclusion London. It was a partnership between Norfolk Coalition, Inclusion London, the Alliance for Inclusive Education, Tara Flood's organisation. Tara spoke here 3 years ago. And Disabled People Against the Cuts. What was decided out of that meeting that we need to build a new leadership nationally, and in Norfolk we've set up our newest member group, or one of our newest member groups, is DPAC Norfolk, Disabled People Against the Cuts Norfolk. Penny's helping to organise that. So if you want to pick up the campaigning, we'd encourage you to join DPAC Norfolk and get involved. One of the proposals that came out of that conference in London was that there should be a manifesto, that the disability movement should write a manifesto that we would then endeavour to get everybody to sign up to. And there's also been a proposal for a freedom drive, similar to that organised in America by Martin Luther King and the organisations of black people fighting for freedom, because if they're taking away our rights. So there's a suggestion that there'll be a freedom drive next year in the summer of disabled people from across the country, from Scotland going down, from the northwest, maybe from Northern Ireland through the northwest, and from the southwest and Bristol, converging on London. So if people are interested in either being involved in DPAC Norfolk, writing a manifesto, campaigning, then the way to take this forward and to take forward some of the things that Jenny's challenged us with today is to get involved in DPAC Norfolk. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thank you, Jenny, for raising so many interesting points for us. Before we now go off to lunch, we're going to try and get you organised this afternoon. We like challenges, get you organised. So Claire, are you going to come and organise us all?
It might be actually when people get back from lunch, if we then put people into groups then to the workshop, I think that probably would be the easiest bit. Okay. When they get back from lunch, come back from here, and at that point we'll move people into workshop groups.
Right.
7 workshops, so we'll tell you where to go and actually come back in.
Okay, last minute change of plan then. Yeah, go and have your lunch, enjoy your lunch, and come